epic history presents the Siege of Toulon. Summer 1793. The French Revolution is raging as it enters its fourth year. Across France, chaos reigns. The new government, headed by infamous members such as Maximilien Robespierre, had unleashed a blood-soaked reign of terror. King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette were guillotined. But the fury of the revolution was not confined to the royal household. Anyone suspected of being disloyal to the new republic was swiftly executed in Paris and in cities across France. But out of this chaos would emerge one of the most charismatic and influential figures the world has ever seen. Hoping to inspire nationalistic fervour, the French government had declared war on the Habsburg Empire, but the strategy soon backfired. While it may have united the French people, it also unified their enemies. Almost all of Europe marshalled their armies in hopes of crushing what they saw as a mortal threat to their monarchies, forming what would be known as the First Coalition.
It is almost impossible to overstate just how dangerous the situation is for France right now. No monarch in Europe wants to see a republic succeed, especially one that just guillotined their king and is right on their doorstep.
France stood alone. To make matters worse, French loyalists were now revolting en masse, determined to topple the new government from within and restore the monarchy. But for the young republic, the worst news was yet to come. In August, the critical port city of Toulon joined the revolt. Toulon was home to the Mediterranean fleet, 1/3 of the entire French Navy. 26 ships of the line, along with several frigates and sloops, were now in the hands of the rebels. The Republican officials governing the city were arrested and hanged. But fearing they could not hold Toulon alone, the rebels made the situation even more precarious by striking a deal with France's greatest rival, the British Royal Navy. In return for protection and a guarantee the port would be returned at the conclusion of hostilities, the rebels offered to turn over both the city and all French naval vessels to the British. Admiral Lord Hood seized on the opportunity and immediately sailed his fleet into the harbour. Aboard the now famous flagship HMS Victory. The Spanish Navy quickly followed. In the blink of an eye, France's naval power and influence in the Mediterranean were gone. Recognizing the danger, the French government ordered all forces in the area to converge and lay siege to Toulon. 17,000 troops raced towards the city. But there was another problem. While the French could quickly muster plenty of soldiers thanks to their mass mobilization efforts, there was a serious lack of trained officers. Many had been aristocrats under the old monarchy, and those who had not already fled the country had been arrested. Nowhere was this lack of experience more glaring than the local commander of French forces, General Jean-François Cateau. He was fiercely loyal, but had no prior military training, having spent most of his time as a court painter. Colonel Dom Martin, one of his only professional trained officers and head of the artillery, had been badly wounded as they neared Toulon, leaving the poorly led French army in even worse shape. But the situation was about to change. Traveling with the army was Antoine Salicetti, a powerful deputy to the ruling government in Paris. He was deeply unimpressed by Carteau and understood the need for talented officers, and so he recommended as Don Martin's replacement a young 24-year-old artillery officer who had fatefully stopped at Toulon en route to the Italian front. His name, Napoleon Bonaparte. A fellow Corsican, Bonaparte was a professionally trained officer, having attended France's elite military academy, but he had virtually no combat experience and was only a captain. Nevertheless, Salicetti and other powerful figures in Paris had a favourable view of Napoleon, and as a result, he was given command of the artillery almost on the spot.
If you think Tom Brady coming off the bench to lead New England to a Super Bowl was the opportunity of a lifetime, this is like that times a million. This is the most important battle going on in all of France. Artillery just happens to be at the heart of it, and here comes Napoleon Bonaparte at just the right place at just the right time. You cannot draw this up any better for him, and it's probably where he gets his famous phrase that ability is nothing without opportunity.
Recapturing Toulon would be no easy task. The port was well defended by high city walls on 3 sides and well-placed forts and redoubts throughout the countryside, making the approaches perilous for any invading army. They were now garrisoned by a combined coalition force of nearly 15,000 soldiers and sailors from Britain, Spain, Naples, and Sardinia. Given the strength of the defences, artillery would be at the centre of overcoming Toulon's perimeter. But when Napoleon took command on September 16th, he was stunned to find the artillery in disarray. He had only 4 heavy cannon, with a handful of mortars and field guns. There was also a meagre supply of powder and shot, and not enough trained gun crews. But within just 6 days of taking command, Bonaparte had constructed 2 new forward batteries, La Montagne and Sans-Culotte, which brought Toulon's outer harbour within range of his heavy guns. A feat he was eager to show off to his superiors. The Allied ships tried to counterfire on the batteries, but the shallow water and elevation of the French positions prevented the larger ships from sailing within range. Admiral Hood was forced to move the British and Spanish fleets out of range to the safety of the inner port. It was a brilliant move by Bonaparte, as it also severely robbed the Allies holding Toulon of critical naval resupply. Napoleon now fervorously went to work, requisitioning unused guns and horses from the surrounding area, training new gun crews, and even setting up an 80-man forge to ensure a steady supply of cannonballs. He leveraged his political connections to convince retired artillery officers to re-enlist, and, without asking permission from his superiors, Bonaparte wrote directly to Paris for supplies, even blackmailing the recently rebellious town of Marseille for help. His leadership and relentless hard work paid off. His force eventually swelled to 64 officers and 1,500 men, commanding 100 cannon, howitzers, and mortars. Seeing that artillery could still decide the final outcome, Napoleon devised a plan that would quickly checkmate the Allies and return the port to French control. Fort La Guillette was the most strategic fort overlooking the harbour. If it could be captured, he could move in heavy guns and unleash a devastating barrage against the British and Spanish fleet. Admiral Hood would have no choice but to withdraw his ships, and with them the Allied garrison holding Toulon. General Carteau agreed to the plan, But to Napoleon's fury, only allocated 400 men for the assault, not the 3,000 he'd requested.
Carteau does this for one reason and one reason only. He dislikes Napoleon Bonaparte. So when this attack fails, Napoleon goes berserk because he knows they just took a golden opportunity and lit it on fire.
On September 22nd, French forces attacked the Allied position at Montcaire. Despite the odds, the French troops charged forward into a hail of cannon and musket fire. But to no avail. Not only was the assault easily repulsed with heavy casualties, it completely exposed the French plan to the Allies. In less than 48 hours, they had heavily reinforced Montcaire. Thousands of Allied troops were immediately diverted to strengthen the position, while they hastily erected a new fort named Fort Mulgrave. With improved earthworks and a large battery of 20 heavy cannon, it was now a terrifying obstacle, blocking Napoleon's route to Fort La Guillette. The French soldiers were so intimidated by it, they nicknamed it Little Gibraltar. Napoleon was furious and worked behind the scenes with his political ally Salicetti to see Carteau removed from command. Their plan worked, and on November 17th, an experienced field commander was placed in charge of the French army, General Dugommier. Upon arriving with thousands of reinforcements and surveying the situation, he immediately saw Napoleon's plan as the best course of action and committed all available resources to it. Now promoted to major, Bonaparte began furiously overseeing the construction of 11 new batteries, with 8 of them positioned opposite Fort Mulgrave. One forward battery was under such heavy enemy fire that virtually every man working on it had been killed or wounded. When additional soldiers refused to be sent there, Napoleon renamed it La Batterie des Hommes sans peur, the battery of men without fear. And immediately, men began volunteering. When a gunner was killed next to him, Napoleon picked up the now blood-soaked ramrod and finished loading the cannon himself. It was a foretelling display of courage, energy, and a willingness to get his hands dirty that endeared Napoleon to his men. On November 30th, the Allied Army commander, British General Charles O'Hara, under mounting pressure, attempted a surprise attack, leading an assault on Napoleon's new batteries facing Fort Malbusquet. Allied forces stormed forward, pouring fire into the French positions before charging with fixed bayonets. Caught off guard, the French fell back in disarray, with several batteries overrun and their guns spiked. But as word reached General Dugommier, he, along with Napoleon, led an overwhelming counterattack that drove the Allied forces back to their lines. During the retreat, General O'Hara was shot in the arm and captured. 12 years before, he had been the British representative that surrendered to George Washington at Yorktown. Now he was surrendering to Napoleon Bonaparte, the only officer in history with that distinction. Sensing the decisive moment had come, General Dugommier ordered final preparations for Napoleon's plan. The night of December 16th was bitterly cold, with a violent storm unleashing a torrent of icy wind and rain. Just after midnight, the French launched their final assault on Fort Mulgrave, with a massive bombardment signaling the start of the attack. Soldiers on both sides had trouble loading their muskets in the heavy rain, leading to vicious close-quarter fighting with bayonets and rifle butts. At 3:15 a.m., Bonaparte led the final wave in person, directly into ferocious hand-to-hand fighting. It was so intense that his horse was killed under him, and he received a near-fatal wound in the thigh, courtesy of a British sergeant's bayonet. As the attack engulfed the Allied garrison, Mulgrave finally fell to the French. They quickly pushed forward and took forts La Guillette and La Balaquire, which had been hurriedly evacuated. Despite his nasty wound, Napoleon refused to leave the field, personally overseeing the construction of the new batteries at La Guillette. By the following afternoon, he had 10 heavy guns in place to shell the Allied ships. Admiral Hood was out of options. With his entire fleet at risk, he immediately ordered a full evacuation of all Allied soldiers and sailors from Toulon, and a general retreat began. That night, as Allied forces withdrew towards the harbour, small teams of British and Spanish sailors rushed to destroy the French ships and naval supplies. They were able to set fire to several buildings and ships, including floating hulks carrying huge powder stores, resulting in massive explosions that lit up the harbour. The French frigate Isis, loaded with over 200 tons of gunpowder, erupted in a huge fireball and sank. But with the main focus on the chaotic evacuation, 18 ships of the line were left undamaged and were soon back in French hands. A huge strategic blunder by the Allies. By the morning of December 19th, all Allied troops had been evacuated, with the British also announcing they would take as many French royalists with them as possible. The nearly 15,000 remaining citizens of Toulon, terrified of the Republic's wrath, frantically clamoured to board the Allied ships. At 9 a.m., as they were still being loaded, Republican soldiers entered the city. Panic swept through the crowds as they rushed toward the shore. Some were killed by French cannonballs crashing around them, while many others drowned amidst the chaos in the harbour. Almost 14,000 were able to escape aboard the British and Spanish ships, but the rest were left to their fate. Over the next 2 weeks, nearly 800 royalist prisoners were either shot or bayoneted without trial. The Allies tried to blame Napoleon for the massacre, but he was still in hospital, recovering from his wound. The young French Republic had endured a near-fatal blow, its borders finally secure and rebellious regions subdued. With the return of Toulon to French control, the Allies had lost their best opportunity to fan the flames of further revolt, and destroy the revolution in its infancy. Instead, against overwhelming odds, the Republic had held the line. Toulon was a stunning achievement for Napoleon, now promoted to Brigadier General by Dugommier and assigned to the Army of Italy. He had also developed a loyal following of officers, many of whom would become his closest friends, and some even his most trusted marshals.
Napoleon goes from captain to brigadier general in just 3 months at Toulon. But within just 6 years of that moment, he'll rise to the very, very top of power in all of France.
It was only his first step, but the legend of Napoleon Bonaparte was born. It was the beginning of an era, and while the French people rejoiced, they could not foresee what lay ahead. France and all Europe would face 21 years of some of the bloodiest conflicts in history. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, we encourage you to channel your inner Napoleon and bombard the like button.
And if you would like to support the channel, please check out our Patreon for exclusive perks. You'll find the link in the description below.
And of course, please do let us know in the comments what topics you'd like to see next.